Okay, thank you very much for being here. My name is Ana Garcia Hernandez. I'm a research fellow at the BCB in Berlin and an incoming postdoc at Universidad del Rosario in Colombia and IPA Colombia. And today I'm going to present evidence from a lab in the field experiment on the effect of voting power or political voice on prosociality. Oopsie. No, yeah. Okay, so I will start motivating a bit the topic on why political participation, especially of underrepresented groups, in this case women, is important. We have some evidence that when women gained voting rights in the US, there was a decline of between 8 and 15% of child mortality. We also know from several papers that look at the random allocation of women to local councils in India that this policy changed different policies. It also reduced discrimination against girls, increased reporting of violence against women, and reduced the number of selective abortions. And increasing the political voice of women may help development through two different channels. All these papers that I mentioned before assume one channel. That is the fact that when women are included in bodies of decision and they have different preferences to men, other preferences are represented in these bodies, and then outcomes change. But what I'm going to do in this paper is that I'm going to present and test another mechanism. That is the fact that just by being empowered or just by being included, these may alter preferences directly, and is what I call the agency effect. There are several theories of agency, both in psychology and in neuroscience, that suggest that this happens. And also in economics, there's like one paper specifically that looks at the effects of democratic institutions in prosociality and finds that participation in these institutions increases cooperation. But this has not been directly tested before. And why is this relevant? Well, because in the presence of this second mechanism, even if the preference of men and women are the same, increasing the representation of women would be important. What is the relationship between, in this paper, I'm going to be answering two research questions. The first one is, what is the relationship between political voice and prosociality? And I present the first test of whether there's a correlation in the field. For that, I use a modified public goods game in a set of Ugandan villages, and I use real public goods. I exogenously assign political voice, and thus I avoid self-selection effects. I also aim to answer the second research question, that is, what is the effect of increasing political voice in those groups that usually do not participate in decision-making? And in this case, I'm gonna be talking about women, and I will introduce some evidence as well of why I do that. And yeah, in this context, they have less political voice. Why is important? Why is prosociality important? Why is it important to look at prosociality in this context? Well, in this context, I talk about contributions to a public good for the community. And in the context of like few formal institutions where communities rely a lot on other members spending time or effort helping the community, prosociality is very important, and it determines the quality of public services. For example, in my sample, in the district of my sample, 60% of the public schools receive more than $300 in a semester from other sources that are not the government. And in 83% of these cases, it came from the community, from the members of the same community. So just to give you a preview of the results, I do not find an overall effect of political voice on contributions to the community. However, I do see a difference by gender. And I see that when the individuals experience a change in voice, women are more affected, or women are more sensitive to these changes in political voice. Initially, they contribute less than men, and those that suffer a negative shift in voice contribute less than 20% less than the men that also experience a shift a negative shift in voice. And I find suggestive evidence that this effect is driven by those women that already have some voice in the community. So just very quickly through the literature and my contribution to the literature, I'm gonna be contributing to two strands of literature. The first one is institutions and behavior. And specifically, I talked before about this paper by Dalbo et al. And the others are related. And my contribution is that I look at political participation and not democratic institutions in general. And I think this is important because even in democratic institutions, you might have more or less political voice. And I look at political voice or political participation specifically. I also do this in the field in a context that is directly relevant and with real goods. And I will also tell you a bit more about it, but the stakes are quite high for the participants. The second literature that I will be contributing to is the one of status and prosociality. So there are like several papers that have looked at what is the relationship between status in a community and the level of cooperation that individuals have towards the members of that community. And most of these papers have been done in developing countries. But most of these papers have been looking at already existing networks. So it's hard to know if those individuals that had more status were more prosocial to start with. And in my paper, I'm going to be exogenously assigning political voice. So I will be able to control for this selection effect. So in the paper, I have a small model, but here I'm just gonna, in interest of time, just skip it, but I'm just gonna give you a bit of a sense or a flavor of why I mean, or what is the motivation of this intrinsic value of political participation, or why individuals should act differently just by having political voice. In the procedural utility theory, the Frey and co-authors present that individuals not only care about the outcomes of the decisions, but also about the process in which these decisions are made. And some of the characteristics that they find in these processes that individuals value is impartiality, trustworthiness of the authorities that make the decisions, and also whether the individuals have a voice in the process. Also, Tyler finds that and co-authors find that there's evidence that when people trust more the institutions, they have more prosocial behavior. So what I'm going to do in this paper is I'm going to test whether voice, that is one of the characteristics that was mentioned before as one of the things that agents value, has the same effect as trust in these processes, and also increases prosocial behavior. And two of the theoretical predictions I'm going to test is whether more political voice increases the level of contributions, and that political voice increases contributions more in women than in men. So just to dive into the design of the game, I'm going to be playing a modified public goods game with 10 participants, and there are going to be 2 rounds of the game that the participants play in this same group of 10 individuals. Then by the random lottery incentive method, I'm going to be choosing one of those 2 rounds, and only one will be realized. And the game is played in a field, which in this context is the communities in which these individuals live. Just very quickly, a standard public good game, I think we all know in this session, but just to go quickly through it, individuals receive an endowment and they choose how much of it they want to contribute to the public account. Then the contributions to the public account are summed up, multiplied by a factor, and given back like a share to the individuals that participate. The modification that I introduced in this public good is that the contributions of the public account, instead of being given back to the participants in the game, will be used to buy something for the community that everyone will be able to enjoy. So the first thing, now that you know the basic setting of the game, I'm gonna walk you through the phases of the game. So the first thing that the individuals do is they vote. They receive a ballot paper and they decide whether they want the funds of the public account to go to education or health. They vote before anything else happens in the game, and this vote cannot be changed. It aims to elicit preferences, but also to allow for grading or granting or withdrawing voting power. And I'll show you now how I do it. And this is the ballot that they receive. Then they circle one of the two sectors and they give it back to the researcher. The second phase, or the second thing that happens, is that the individuals receive the treatment. And in this case is political voice or voting power. And this voting power is whether they are able to count their vote towards health or education. So at the beginning of each round, participants receive a card. If the card is red, it means that their vote will not be valid in that round. So they do not have political voice. If the card is green, it means that they will have voting power. There are 5 green cards and 5 red cards, and they are randomly allocated in the first round of the game. Then in the second round of the game, the color of the card will change, but individuals don't know, participants don't know this will happen. They know there are 5 green cards and 5 red cards, but they don't know who has each of them. They only know what do they have. So in this way, no one perceives to be pivotal. And this is the way that is done in the field. So each individual receives one of the 2 envelopes and they can see the card that is inside. The third step, or the third phase, is the contributions. This is normal, as in a normal public good game. Participants receive an endowment of 10 tokens that is equivalent to around 10,000 Ugandan shillings, and this is about 2.53 euros. And they decide whether they want to keep it for themselves in the private account. They will receive the total number, the tokens that they decide to keep, and how much they want to contribute to the public account. In the public account, we'll count the number of tokens of everyone, of each of the participants, and I will multiply it by, the researcher will multiply it by a factor of 2. And in this case, the good is used to buy something for the primary school or for the health center in the community, instead of being given back to the participants. So one of the characteristics of my design is that I use the strategy method. So the participants choose in each of the rounds of the game how much they want to contribute to the public account in case health wins or in case education wins. The way I do it practically is that they receive 2 endowments, one for health and one for education. They have different colors, as you can see in the picture in the bottom left, and they decide how many they want to put in the public account by introducing the different tokens in the envelope. So it will be optimal for them to contribute the desired amount independently, conditional on that sector being the winner. And why I do this? Well, I do this because let's assume that player 1 strongly prefers health and player 2 strongly prefers education. So they will contribute. In this case, I indicate 1 contributing, 0 not contributing, to the public account in case in health and in education. So now let's assume I empower player 1 and I do not empower player 2. So empowering player 1 means that the vote of player 1 will count because player 1 prefers health. Health will be the sector chosen. And what if I don't play the strategy method, what I would see is that player 1 is very pro-social, she contributed, while player 2 didn't. But actually both are as pro-social, it's just that player 2 prefer education instead of health. So that's why I play the strategy method. Another characteristic of my design is that participants will be assigned to 2 groups. The first one is the one that gains political voice, meaning that they didn't have power in the first round and yes in the second one, and the ones that lose political voice, and those will be like the other ones. And this will be important when I show you the results. So just to sum up, at the beginning, the participants vote for educational health. Then the first round starts, they receive the treatment, and then they choose how much to contribute. For the second round is the same. Then we choose which round is selected, and we count the valid votes and the payouts. And then there's an exit survey at the end of the experiment. So just very quickly, my sample is in the north of Uganda in a district called Lira. I selected randomly 20 communities from the list of villages from the district that had a health center and a public school in the area. And then I selected the participants by random walk the previous day. And we got a 94% attendance of those mobilized the previous day. So at the end, we have 290 individuals in 10 games, in 10 per game, so and 29 sessions. In the same village, there were either 1 or 2 games played, and in case of 2, they were played simultaneously, so there was no communication between participants. And these villages were quite far, so I also don't think there was communication between them in different days. So 5 minutes? Okay, cool, thanks. So these very quickly are summary statistics of the sample, and I split them by gender. Here we see that women are on average younger than men. They also are less educated. They also contribute less to the community in terms of number of hours that they work for the community. And in these indices of wealth, participation, social and personal empowerment that I construct with different variables of the survey, they are also less wealthy, less empowered socially and personally. In terms of number of votes by gender for different sectors, it's quite balanced. Like women vote or prefer a bit more education than men, but it's not statistically significantly different. And here in this table, you can see the average number of contributions to the public account by gender. Here I show you the number of tokens over 10 that they contribute to the in the round 1 or in the round 2, whether they receive like the green card or the red card, so they are treated or not. Here we already see that there's in the first round there's not much going on in terms of difference by gender, but in the second round we see that women participate less on average, and this movement is coming specifically from those that receive the red card in the second round, meaning that they received the green card in the first round, so basically they lost political voice between the 2 rounds. So now to the results. The first thing that I'm gonna show you is whether political voice has an effect on contributions. And here I just regress the treatment on the outcome, that is the number of contributions to the public account. In the first and second column, you can see the contributions to the preferred sector, so that sector that they voted for. And in the third and fourth, the total number of contributions. Also in the fifth and the sixth column, what I do is to construct an outcome variable that is the difference between contributions of the round 2 and round 1. And here the treatment is whether they gain or lose political voice, and being one, those that gain political voice. Across specifications, I also do this for the average, for the non-preferred sector, clustering at village level. This one is cluster at game level. Like I don't see an effect of political voice on contributions. I only see these positive, slightly like a significant positive effect in round 2, and it's coming from the health sector. I don't really know what's happening here because in the rest of the specifications, I don't find anything across. For the second hypothesis, whether women are less pro-social or more pro-social than men, what I do is I interact the gender by the treatment. And here in table format, I'm just going to show you that on average, women are less pro-social than men in all rounds, and specifically they are like less pro-social in the second round. And here I'm just going to point out to these like coefficient here, but I think I'm going to show it more clearly in this graph here. So I'm just going to walk you through this one, but if you're interested, I can go back to the table at some point. So here on the left side of the graph, we can see those participants that gain political voice, and on the right side, we see those ones that lose political voice. On the left, we see that there's no significant, it's not different from 0 from both male and female for those that gain political voice, but for those that lose political voice on the right side of the graph, we see that for male is still not significantly different from 0, but for female participants, we see a difference. And also in the ones that lose, there's also a significant difference between men and women at 10% level. So just a short discussion of the results on why I don't think I find effect on political voice on contributions, opposite to what Dalbo and co-authors find in their papers. Because I think here between the two sectors, there was not a lot of difference on how much people value the sector. So 81% of the individuals contributed the same or plus minus one token between health and education. So I think that's playing a role. I also think that the person who makes the decision in this context, if I don't have political voice, is the rest of the group. And the rest of the group are people that live in my village and that know what we need. So just quickly, I'm gonna, well, I have like several robustness checks. If you're interested, please let me know during the questions and I can go back to any of these. And just to conclude, I test whether political voice has an effect on pro-social behavior, and I find that I don't find any effect of any evidence of this. And what I find, however, is that women are more sensitive to changes in political voice, and particularly they experience more when they feel a negative shift in empowerment. Implications both for thinking about the inclusion of underrepresented groups in committees that, for example, manage funds, and also for the literature, thinking about preference change when people experience voting power or not. And I think I'm going to leave it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, so I just wanted to ask whether you think the environment where you fielded this experiment had an effect, any cultural effect, because this is a specific society and maybe in different places would you get different results? What do you think?
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I'm interested to look at this in the future. I would like to know, and like as I said before, I'm very interested in gender, but that's very specific to this context. I think like maybe underrepresented groups in other contexts could be the youth or people that cannot vote for other reasons. So I think I'm very interested at looking at that in other contexts as well. Like in this specific context, gender is very correlated with not having a voice in the community. But I'm interested at looking at these in a more general way in other contexts.
Interesting. Okay, so thank you very much. And we will now hear Katharina Monsen.
Okay,
thank you.
I will try to share my screen. It's still not large. Just a second. So you can all see my slides, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it. It's just not full screen.
Yeah, I'm wondering why it doesn't react at all. And also I can't click to the next slide. So I will stop again and
maybe you can just use control and it will make it full screen.
I tried, but it didn't react.
Okay. Yeah, maybe you can reopen this.
Okay. Let's see. Now it's reacting, right? Now it's large screen. And I can also go to the second slide, which is a good thing. Okay, and yeah, I hope you can hear me too, now that you can see my slides. Yeah, thank you for attending the session on charitable giving. In my experiment, charity relates to the environment, and I'll explain that in more detail later. So the title of the paper is Information Avoidance and Self-Interest in Markets, Dictatorship and Democracy, and it's an experimental paper joined with Markus Ohndorff, who's also at the University of Innsbruck. Okay, to motivate briefly what we are doing in this paper, well, think of different kinds of decisions which have some relevance for the environment. For example, you go to the supermarket and you choose between different products, and they have externalities as in they could be produced organically or not, or within your region such that transportation has less emissions. Or think of the choice to contract some electricity. So you can decide if it was produced by solar energy, water, or just in a conventional way. And finally, every few years, you have to elect a new government and you choose between parties with different environmental policy programs. And I mean, these choices differ in many aspects, but the aspect I want to focus on for this paper is that they are made in different institutional settings. So the purchase decision is just individual decision making. It's you, and your choice has an externality that is smaller or larger. When you live in a household with many people or with several people, you're sort of the dictator that decides which kind of electricity contract you choose for all of them. And then finally, with the majority voting and the democracy, it's your vote that has a tiny impact on the environmental policy that is implemented in the end. But it's not only the institutional setting that differs between these environmentally relevant decisions, it's also the informational context. So there are cases where you immediately see the size of the externalities, and there are also situations where it's initially hidden and you need to put some additional effort to be able to observe the consequences of your choices. And what we are investigating in this paper is how decisions depend on, first of all, the institutional context, then the availability of information, and how these two factors interact and influence the decisions. And we are running a lab experiment to find out. Just very briefly on the literature, I guess you already know I was talking about hidden information that is related to the literature on moral wiggle room exploitation, going back to the seminal paper by Dana et al. And since then, there's a large strand of literature growing. But as we are looking into institutional context, there's also this literature on expressive voting. So when your vote has a very tiny chance of becoming relevant, then you do not focus on the costs that it would have for you if it was implemented. So you rather ignore the costs and express your preferences by voting, not taking costs into account. Or there's this literature on diffusion of responsibility. It's not just you responsible for the final outcome, but also other people, and this might affect the way you behave. And as we are also looking at the individual decisions made in the purchase context, it also relates to moral behavior on markets. Yeah, let me explain our experimental design. We're looking at 24 decisions, and in each decision, subjects can choose between option A and option B. And these two options differ in their payoffs for the subjects and also in their externalities. And well, it's the externalities where the environmental context comes in, because they are implemented as donations to carbon offsets, so they have an impact outside the laboratory. We implement situations with different payoff differences. So these payoff differences can either be low, that means 5 or 10 experimental currency units, or large, that's 15 or 20. And well, coming to the externalities of the options, for option A, it's always 15 in every round of these 24. And for externality B, it's either 0, so it can be worse, or it's 30 when it's better than option A, and these situations are equally likely. And we implement situations with aligned interests. That means that the option with the higher payoff for the subject also has the higher positive externality for the environment, or situations with conflicting interests where it's exactly the opposite way. And both are, again, equally likely. Now, about our between subject treatments, we alter the observability of option B's externality and also the institutional setting. I'll first come to the observability, where in the full information treatment, it's straightforward. You see the payoffs and you immediately observe the externalities. So if it's 0 or 30 for option B. With hidden information, the externality of the second option is hidden, but there is this button, which you can click. You don't need to click it to make your choice. And clicking has a tiny cost. So it costs 1 cent if you convert the experimental currency units into euros, but we round up towards the next 10 cents. So it disappears when we pay out because we're just paying out 2 rounds. But we just wanted to have these very tiny costs to capture that there is some negligible amount of effort related to gathering information. Then about the institutional setting, well, in the market context, subjects just take the roles of buyers, and well, the supply side is computerized because we want to control the situations they can choose between. And subjects can choose between these 2 products with different prices and externalities. In the dictatorship setting, subjects are split into groups of 3, and one of them is the dictator. And this person determines which option to implement for the entire group. With democracy, we are implementing small and large democracies in the lab. So a small democracy consists of 3 people and a large democracy of 11. And they vote for an option, and the option that has received the majority of votes will be implemented for the entire group. That means every group member gets the same payoff and contributes the same amount to the carbon offset. And well, when we think of what changes in between these different institutional settings, well, for the market, it's just you deciding for yourself, and your impact is also relatively limited because it's just your contributions. Moving to the dictatorship, the impact is larger because it's not only your contribution, but also the contribution of your group members. But now choosing selfishly also has some sort of altruistic component, because by maximizing your personal payoff, you also maximize your group members' payoff. And in the experiment, we'll find out which of these 2 effects prevails. And then when we move from dictatorship to democracy, again, there are two effects coming in. Now it's not just you responsible for the final outcome, but since others are voting on the final allocation, there is some diffusion of responsibility that might affect your choices. But also because it's especially in the large democracy, it's unlikely that your choice will be implemented. You might be prone to some expressive voting, so to just express your green preferences without taking into account the costs. This is just a screenshot of what it looked like in the market with hidden information. So just an example, it looked very similar in the other treatments. You have the 2 options with their price and their payoffs. This is the contribution of option A. Here for option B, it's hidden, so either 0 or 30. This is the button you need to click if you want to know. And here you make your, in this case, purchase decision. And if we weren't in the market setting, we wouldn't have the word product here, but option. Okay, our experimental procedure is pretty standard. So it was Zetri, it was in the lab in Innsbruck. And yeah, well, we had a quiz to make sure they understood, and only once everybody had understood our instructions, the experiment started. And in the end, we also elicit their political, environmental, and also honesty preferences. We're paying out the very first round and 1 randomly determined round, because first there is this very first round, and afterwards they are informed that the experiment will continue. There's something in the chat. 10 minutes. Okay, thanks. Right, about the behavioral predictions, we expect subjects to exploit more wiggle room. That means that the share of selfish choices in the conflict situations will be larger under hidden than under full information. So we expect them to exploit this ignorance in order to choose selfishly without feeling bad about themselves. And we expect this phenomenon to be more pronounced for the smaller payoff differences, and well, at the same time, then of course, less pronounced for larger payoff differences, because here you can justify taking a selfish action because it would be extremely expensive not to do so. Then moving from market to dictatorship, well, the larger environmental impact would speak in favor of a less selfish choice, but then there's this excuse of altruism to choose a payoff dominant option, and hence we will see what comes out. And moving from dictatorship to the democracies, we have diffusion of responsibility on the one side and expressive voting on the other side. Okay, and then let's look into our results. First, I want to point out that we are looking at the full information treatment only, and the selfish choices in conflict situations, meaning the choice with the higher payoff for the subject had the lower contribution to the carbon offset. And it's split up here. We are just looking at low payoff differences. Here there are the high payoff differences, and here it's all data together. What you can see here is that for high payoff differences, the institutional setting doesn't matter. For low payoff differences, it does. And interestingly, the share of selfish choices is lowest in the market implementation and in the, we call it large democracy, with 11 voters. In between, people are more selfish. So moving from market to dictator, you see that this additional excuse that you may be altruistic with respect to your group members, that actually is used by people, and they become more selfish towards the environment. But interestingly, we do find evidence for expressive voting, because in the large democracy, the share of selfish choices is way lower than in the smaller democracies. This must be the effect that is driving this voting behavior. Okay, so this was full information. Well, these are regressions confirming what I just said. Let's now look into the same treatments, but in the hidden information implementation. And what you see for low payoff differences and for high payoff differences, that all the differences have disappeared completely. So when the information on the externalities is initially hidden, the institutional context doesn't matter at all. It's just that, well, the level of substance is slightly higher for the high payoff differences, which makes sense, but apart from that, we don't see any changes. And here also in the regressions, you see that the dummies for the treatment, they are all insignificant. Now, when we look into more rigorous exploitation, we bring the full information and the hidden information treatments together. And so these bars mean, well, the first one is always the full information treatment. The second one is the hidden information treatment. And here, low payoff differences, high payoff differences. And what you can see in all treatments is that under hidden information, choices are more selfish than under full information. So this is expected. But when you think of what I was just explaining about behavior in full information or just in hidden information, you can see that more wiggle room exploitation plays a large role in the market treatment and also in these large democracies. Checking the chat. Yes, thanks. But it's less pronounced in the other two treatments, so in the dictatorship setting and in the smaller democracies. Okay, and this is also confirmed by our regression results. When we then look into the revelation decisions, so not at the final choices, but just whether subjects click their button to reveal the externalities, we see that it's always lowest in the treatment with a large democracy, in this voting 11 treatment, and this may be due to the diffusion of responsibility. So I rely on others revealing information, so I won't reveal information myself. I'm pretty sure some people in my group will gather information. There is no difference in the other three treatments. So it doesn't matter for the revelation choice if I'm in a market or a dictator or in a small democracy setting. So to wrap up, what we did in this paper was we investigated the influence of the institutional frames both on selfishness and on strategic ignorance, so staying ignorant in order to behave selfishly. And we find that under full information in markets and in large democracies, the share of selfish decisions is lowest, such that in the two extreme cases, people are least selfish. Then under hidden information, the institutional frame doesn't play a role for the share of selfish choices. And taking these two findings together, we find that moral wiggle room exploitation is most pronounced in markets and in large democracies. So what we can conclude is that institutions matter a lot if the externalities are readily observable. And if you want institutions to matter, then the information of the environmental consequences should not be avoidable, because otherwise they will be, and this will affect selfishness. Okay, and yeah, that's all from my side, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. You still have 2 minutes, so we have some time for questions. Okay.
Okay. So if there aren't any now, but maybe later, you can also send me an email. I guess you can Google my name at Innsbruck. There's only one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your attention.
Thank you. I think we should wait about 5 more minutes though before we continue, because people are moving between different sessions. So let's take 5 minutes and then we continue.
Yeah, would it be okay if I already start sharing my screen?
Yes, for sure. Gelia.
Yes.
So just help me how to pronounce your last name.
Just say Lilia.
Lilia, sure. No, I can try.
Okay, it's Żurachowska, with Żu like journal, and then
Żurachowska, that's okay. Żurachowska.
Okay.
Right, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction and for the attempt to pronouncing my very complicated last name. It was a very good try. So I'm from the University of Duisburg-Essen, and I will talk today about a paper called "I am paid, would you donate to me? Experts' beliefs versus field experimental data." Actually, it's a different title than the working paper title, which we will have to update at some point. And it's joint work with Holger Rau, who is also today in the audience, and Anja Samek. Okay. So first of all, the session is called Charities, so I think you are all familiar with the fact that charities is something very important, especially in the US. So I will not bother spending too much time talking about convincing you why this is important. I will just give you one figure, namely private households in the US contribute almost $450 billion to charities every year. And in fact, we have been working on this paper for a while, and we had to update the number because it's actually increasing over time. And also, it's a well-known fact that some charities are using paid solicitors and others are using volunteers. So what we want to do is we want actually to look at what happens if the potential donors learn whether their solicitors are volunteers or paid workers. And in fact, some charities decide to reveal this information, some don't. And in some states, it's actually obligatory to reveal this information. Like, for example, in Alaska, there is a law for that. While in other states, this information can be kept secretly. Well, many people working in the voluntary sector or in the charity sector believe that volunteers may be more effective than paid solicitors when soliciting donations. And there are two sides of reasoning behind it. The one is it could be that volunteers are more motivated, and there are studies looking at testing this hypothesis. This is exactly what we are not looking at. In fact, we are trying to hold this part constant. The other side is it could be that potential donors react differently to this information, whether they learn that the solicitor is paid or a volunteer. And this overall side of how donors react has been also obviously analyzed, but as far as we know, this particular question has not been analyzed yet. Now, if we look at this side alone, again, there are several sides to this. And the point is, what happens on the donor side if they learn about the compensation status of solicitors? On the one side, it could be that it influences donors' perception of the charity. On the other side, it could be that it influences donors' perception of the solicitors. On the charity side, we know from literature that information which is obtained during the solicitation process has a signaling value. And depending on what kind of signal is received, it can have an influence on donations. So if this is playing a role in our context, then we propose that whether or not a charity informs potential donors that the solicitors are paid or volunteers may have a signal of transparency. And transparency is quite often associated with quality of the charity. So it could well be that more transparent charities could be perceived as more trustworthy, and this can increase donations. On the other side, if we look at the side of how donors perceive the solicitors, there could also be something going on. We know again from literature that a positive perception of solicitors increases the liking of the solicitors, and the solicitors who are more liked are also more likely to actually increase donations. And well, the question is, what would actually increase the liking of the donors? Again, it's not that clear. If the donors learn that the solicitor is a volunteer, then they might think that this is a signal of intrinsic motivation of the donor. Remember that we're actually holding the true motivation of the intrinsic motivation of the solicitor. We're actually holding this part constant, but obviously the donors don't know that. And if the donors believe that the volunteers are more intrinsically motivated, they might like them more, and therefore they could increase donations. On the very contrary, it could also be the case that admitting to be a paid solicitor can be perceived as particularly honest, and the donors might be actually very happy about receiving this honest information, which then makes them like the solicitors, and this could increase donations. So what do we do in our study? We actually do three things. In fact, it's a combination of three different parts of studies. The first is we have a field experiment in which we communicate the compensation status of the solicitors in our field experiment. I will tell you more about this, obviously. Second, we also combine the evidence from our field experiment to an incentivized survey of forecasts with fundraisers, so it's experts in the field. Why do we do that? Well, we want to learn whether what we learn in our field study is already obvious and no one needs our study, or maybe it's actually very informative. And lastly, on the previous slide, I just showed you that depending on whatever we find, there could be many different channels going on. So we add another little survey to actually try out what kind of channel could drive our results in the field experiment. And I will tell you about this in the very end. Hopefully I will have time also, not just to tell you the results, but also tell you about the design of this little survey. First, let me talk about the field experiment and the experts' forecasts. So in the field experiment, we have a door-to-door natural field experiment. We ran it in Wisconsin, and we contacted more than 2,800 households. So we hired 17 undergraduate students with gender balancing, and the students were trained to carry out the experiment acting as door-to-door solicitors. Well, acting sounds kind of shady, as if it would deceive anyone. That's not the case. They were actually trying to raise money for a charity organization, which we partnered up. And our solicitors worked under a combined contract. So thereby we rule out the selection of the solicitors into the different payment conditions. In fact, each of the solicitor completed 4 routes per day. So they had a predefined list of the households to which they were supposed to go. And for 2 of these routes, they were paid, and for 2 of the other routes, they were not paid. So we have a balanced data set of paid and volunteer conditions. So far, I haven't told you anything about the information which goes to the donors, but I will do that on the next slide. So if a household is approached and if the door is open, then the solicitor reads out a script which contains 3 kinds of important information. First, it always contains information about the charity. I will not tell you much about it right now because of time reasons, but if we have time in the end, I can tell you more. Just the title of it, it's UW Family Voices. The second kind of information is they say that 100% of the money goes to the charity, so of the donated money, which means that we can hold the efficiency of the donations constant between all the conditions. And lastly comes our treatment intervention. And the treatment intervention comes through the very first sentence which the solicitors say. So if the door is open, depending on the treatment, they either say, hello, I'm being paid by UW Medicine to work raising money for UW Family Voices, or they say the same sentence, but just say, I'm an unpaid volunteer and I'm volunteering to raise this money, or in the control conditions, they just say, hello, I am from UW Medicine raising money for UW Voices. And this is almost the only way how we introduce our treatments. In fact, there is one little more trick. They have name badges on their chests, and the name badges either just say that they're what their name is, or it says unpaid volunteer or paid worker. So these are the conditions which we have. We have actually 2 control conditions to be sure that we really are able to control for the motivation of the solicitors once they know themselves whether they're paid or not. And then we have our 2 treatments, the paid treatment and the volunteer treatment. So in the paid treatment, they are paid and they reveal this information to the donors. And in the volunteer treatment, they're not paid and they reveal this information to the potential donors. And obviously not every household that was assigned to the study also opened the door. 10 minutes? Okay, thanks. So we have in the end 1,037 observations. So this is an observation is every household which opened the door, no matter whether they actually made a donating decision or not. Okay, and the design of the forecast, we have recruited people who are very familiar with fundraising, and in fact, they work in the fundraising sector. Some of them work for over 10 years there, and they were recruited via the Charity Navigator and they were also contacted at the Science of Philanthropy initiative last year. And the design of the forecast was, first they were given information about our study. Then they received information about the donation probability and also about the conditional donation amounts in our both control conditions, so in control paid and in control volunteer. And then they were asked to make a forecast what they think would be the donation probability and actually also the conditional donation amount in the two treatments, in paid and in volunteer. And we have 101 observations from this, from people who are working in the charity sector and have never read our paper before. Now the results of the field experiment and the experts forecast. So as we were hoping, fortunately, we do not have any statistical difference between the two control conditions. Therefore, we were able to pool this data, which also mimics the reality much more, because in reality, when you do not know what is the payment status of the solicitor who comes to your door, it might actually both. And I will present you just mainly the parametric results. And for the field data, it's quite obvious what I present. It's the standard things. I just tell you the average donation rates in paid, in volunteer, and in control. So we can see whether paid versus control and volunteer versus control actually decreases or increases donation rates. And for curiosity, although this is not the object of the paper, I will also give you the comparison between the two treatments. For the forecast, it's slightly more complicated. It's not exactly what you will see in the graph, because we have qualitatively different data in the forecasts than in the field experiment. This is why we cannot directly compare these figures. So what we do is we calculate the increase or decrease in donation rates between treatments and the control in the field experiment. And we calculate the predicted decrease or increase between the treatments and the control, which comes from the forecast. And then we compare these two differences. So then we can say whether the increase or decrease are overestimated or underestimated, or maybe actually go in the opposite directions. So here are the data of the donation rates in the field experiment, and I think it's quite clear what the picture tells us, but I will still tell you in words what it says. First of all, paid actually has a higher likelihood of donations than the control condition, and this is statistically significant. Then for volunteers, we actually do not find any difference between the control and the volunteers. And we do find some support for a difference between paid and volunteers. So paid seems to be more effective than volunteers. Now, what about the professionals? Did they actually expect exactly that? No, in fact, they expected exactly the opposite. So the professionals, they expected that in paid, donations actually decrease compared to the controls. And in volunteer, they expected that donations will increase, or donation rates will increase compared to the control. So apparently our study is very informative, because these experts who have been working in this field for many, many years expect exactly the opposite. And I will not show you this on the slides, but regarding the conditional donation rates, experts forecast go exactly in the same direction. While in the field experiment, once you actually have decided to donate, the donation levels, they are the same overall, the conditions. So what about the channels? So I do have some time talking about it. And let us recall the potential channels that, I see 5 minutes, thank you. Let us recall the potential channels which could actually play a role for the results that we do get in the field experiment. So we do have a positive effect of information that the solicitors are paid on donation rates. And we said this could either be from the fact that donors' perception of the charity is influenced, because they maybe perceive the charity as more trustworthy, or it could come from the side that donors' perception of the solicitor is changed. So apparently, or potentially, admitting to be paid can have a signal of honesty, and the donors might be happy that the solicitors told the truth. So we have recruited another 200 subjects completely randomly from the US population. I mean, not completely randomly, they had to be 18 at least, for example. And we recruited them via the platform Prolific, which is a bit similar to mTurk, but purely for scientific reasons. And everybody received some information, some general information about charities and donations, like that it is quite common that in the US, solicitors come approaching people at the doors and so on. And then we split these people into groups. Half of the people were asked to imagine that a solicitor came to the door and told them that the solicitor was a paid worker. And half of the people was asked to imagine that the solicitor came to the door and told them that the solicitor was a volunteer. And then these subjects were presented a series of statements, and they had two tasks. The one task was to rank these aspects of the statements on how important these aspects would be for their personal donation decisions, because ex ante we don't really know what do people care about. And the second task was for each of the statements to say how much they agree with the statement. So on a scale from 1, strongly disagree, to 7, strongly agree, with 4 being neither agree nor disagree. And on the following slide, I will show you a graph with these statements and their agreements, and they are already ranked according to the importance. So if you see something on the left, it means it has been ranked very important. If it's on the right, it means that it has been ranked rather very unimportant. So here you see what happened with the statements in paid and volunteer. I think the first thing which is obvious is that the highest agreement was with the two statements, I believe the solicitor, which was very important to us because it could be that maybe volunteers or people claiming to be volunteers are perceived as liars, who knows. And people were happy that the solicitor told the truth. And well, you see that apparently you don't need any statistics to observe that there is no difference between paid and volunteer regarding the believing statement. But there is a statistical difference between being happy that the solicitor told the truth. So in paid, potential donors from this survey are statistically high, more happy about being told the truth than in volunteer. Now, what about regarding the other side, the charity? In fact, we do not find that the trust in charity is higher, 2 minutes, is higher in paid than in volunteer. In fact, we even find a very small difference there. So 2 minutes for 2 more slides. I think I will manage to do that. Let me just quickly sum up what we found. So we have studied the effect of information about solicitors' compensation. The results from the field experiment are that if donors are informed that the solicitors are paid, this increases donation rates. And if donors are informed that solicitors are volunteer, this has no effect on donation rates. Contrary to that, experts believe that informing donors that solicitors are paid has a decreasing effect on donations. And they expect the opposite for the case when donors are informed that the solicitors are unpaid volunteers. And in our last survey, we were able to find out that the positive effect in our paid treatment comes from the fact that donors are happy that they're told the truth by the solicitors, which means that the attitudes towards the solicitor changes. It's not the effect going through the attitudes towards the charity which is changing. So the very last slide. Our results may actually have some nice implications. On the one side, we find that informing donors that solicitors are paid has a positive effect. We do not find a negative effect of informing donors that solicitors are volunteers. So the message is quite straightforward. It can never harm and potentially can actually help you to inform donors that the solicitors, whatever the solicitors are paid or unpaid. And the study is important for 2 reasons. For the practitioners, it's very important because apparently they expect something else, so it's informative for them. And scientifically, it's also quite nice because we are able to find out what kind of channel is actually driving our results. So we find that it's not the attitudes towards the charity which is changed in the treatment, but it's the attitudes towards the solicitor which is changed in the treatments. So now I'm looking forward to your comments, and if the 5 minutes will not be enough, you're welcome to also send me an email at some point. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Any questions? Ana Garcia? Ana?
Yeah, I do have 2 questions. The first one is regarding the experts' report. Like, do they know that you keep constant this like intrinsic motivation when they report their expectations of the effect?
So they're giving some information about our study. In fact, it's part of a larger survey. There is also another paper from our co-author Anja Samek, in which other data from the survey are used. And in this big study, every part of the study starts with this experts being informed about what happens in a particular experiment, field experiment, and then they're asked to make some particular forecasts. So I don't know by heart what exactly was the information, but I could look it up in the paper. So we, in our not yet updated version of the draft, also have the full text, which is presented to the experts in the appendix.
Because I guess like you control that in the field experiment, and that's clear, but I wonder if like what the experts believe goes through that channel that if you haven't like told them, they might not be able to like take into account.
Yeah, that's a good question. I will have to look this up, what exactly what I would tell them.
And then the other question that I had is whether you know if this increase in contributions or in like charity givings is enough to compensate how much the people are going to be paid for. Like,
so
I wonder, and it's just like, maybe you don't have this information or you haven't done the calculations, but I wonder that, yeah, because this will be determined like also for charities to decide whether they want to pay or not, whether this increase compensates how much they're going to pay them.
So if you ask this question, then it seems like I was not clear enough at one particular point. Our study is not aimed at finding out whether it's a good idea to pay the solicitors or not. We are actually not attacking this question at all. What we are saying is that there are already charities right now. Many of them have already decided to either just have volunteers or to have paid workers. Many of those charities decide not to share this information. So what we say is that once you have already made this decision, whether you want to pay them or not, should you reveal this information or not? And revealing this information is completely costless.
Okay, I'll think a bit more about it and I'll email you. Yeah. I don't want to take all the time.
I think you could. I don't think anyone minds right now, or maybe there are more questions.
Yes, Maximilian.
Hi, Lilia. Thank you for the talk.
Hi, Max.
Did you check a little bit about the characteristics of the solicitors? So if there's like, because with this payment or making official the payment, you're basically taking out this channel that I'm donating not only to the charity, but also to the solicitor, which might be perhaps more relevant for me for some.
That's a very good question. In fact, all these p-values which I presented here, not here, but on this slide, no, actually on this slide here, there are often regressions where we have solicitor fixed effects. So we control for the particular solicitors which are going from door to door. So we also have not regression results, where we don't control for this, but this particular p-values are from the regressions where, so the first value is always the one where we only control for the solicitor fixed effect, and the second figure is always when we also add additional variables.
Okay.
So we actually, we did find a little bit something like there is a morning effect. People apparently like to donate more or less in the morning. And we did not find that solicitors which are female collect more money than others, which actually has been found in some other studies. But yeah, it's a very good question, and we do take care of this. Plus, remember that every solicitor is actually part of every treatment.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any other questions? Okay, so thank you.
Thank you too.
I
So
will
then
be
I
the
guess I
last
stop
presenter.
sharing, right?
Yes, you need to stop sharing. I will share my screen. Okay. 1 second.
Do you want us to take time for you, or?
Sure, I can do it, I think, but yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So can you all see my screen right now? Okay. So hi, everyone. I'm Abigail Hurwitz. I'm an assistant professor at the Hebrew University, and I'm also a visiting scholar at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. And I will actually present you a paper that is not about charitable giving. I don't know why, but this is how it is. So I hope it will be interesting for you, although it's not really related to the topic of the session. And this presentation will be about a paper called Is 1 + 1 Always 2? Ensuring Longevity Risk While Having Multiple Saving Accounts. This is a joint work with Orly Sadeh. She's a professor at the Hebrew University as well. So since I'm not sure if you are from this area of research, I will just speak a little bit about the motivation. So imagine that you've just retired to pension, and now you need to decide how to withdraw your savings. So would you like to withdraw one amount, a lump sum amount upon retirement, or would you like to split the money towards a monthly or a yearly annuity payments? And this decision is very important for your well-being, as well as very difficult to perform. Now imagine that not only that you need to decide, you've saved your amount, your savings, your pension savings, via different products, different providers, several accounts. Will that change the way that you decide? Will the distribution of money across your accounts have consequences to your decision? This is basically the motivation and the question in this research. And I also want to emphasize that this question is also important for the managers of insurance companies, because it's very much related to the way they manage their investments and they manage their asset and liabilities. So basically the topic of this research is, does the distribution of pension savings across saving accounts and different pension providers will affect the decision whether to withdraw your pension as a monthly annuity, meaning, just to be clear, an amount you will receive each and every month after retirement for the rest of your life, which includes insurance against the financial risk that you will live for many years and you do not have the funding for that necessarily, or just cash one amount upon retirement. And as the size of a specific account per se matters for the decision, this is, as I said, important for households and also for saving institutions. I don't have the time to review the literature. I would just say that there's a lot of literature in the household finance area about annuity choices, because the literature has this kind of puzzle in which, theoretically speaking, every household will benefit from purchasing an annuity, but in reality, especially in the United States, people don't do that. We are also related to the literature about asset liability management. I will speak about mental accounting, and of course about multiple saving accounts, meaning having more than one account when you need to decide. In terms of methodology and the design, we first look at data, real data about retirees. I will explain that in a second. Then, because our data and every data will have some limitation, we have conducted an online survey experiment. This experiment was conducted, first of all, with a representative sample and experts. So this relates to the previous presentation about the decisions of experts. And we also performed an incentivized lab experiment among students. So I will briefly explain that. In terms of data, I will show you some results, just some because I don't have time, annuitization decisions from a proprietary data of a large insurance company in Israel regarding pension decisions of retirees who retired between the years 2009 and 2013. We have 15,293 retaillees, and just to be clear, these are all the retirees in this insurance company. I can explain in further details why, and a big insurance company in like 4 years, they only have 15,000 retirees, but mainly the reason is the specific product we are looking at. And relatively, we have substantial additional information and control about these people. However, there are some challenges, such as this is only one insurance company and just one insurance product, meaning that the people in our database may have more products and more pension accounts. And we don't, hence we don't observe the entire portfolio, and I will show you what we do to overcome this limitation. Further, we use an experimental survey, online survey. This is conducted in Israel, but it's in a platform that is similar to Amtrak or Prolific that are usually used in different countries. We recruit almost 2,000 Israeli participants, and we further conduct a survey among experts, which is very similar. Just to be clear, experts here are either finance professors, or most of them are senior managers, meaning CEOs or vice presidents of Israeli insurance companies. Therefore, we only have 57 of them because it wasn't that easy to recruit these people. Thereafter, we also implement an experiment in, I will just skip this slide. We also conduct an experiment in the lab. The aim of this experiment is to validate the results of our surveys, to control the information conditions. I will explain that in a minute, to enable a repeat of the decision, and also to enable some monetary reward. I will first start by describing what we do with our data. I already said that we have 15,000 retirees, and the first result that I want to show you is that we split the data into people who saved small versus large accounts in our data set, where small are accounts that are below the median savings in our database, and large are the people who saved above the median saving amount. And what we see here is the proportion of retirees who chose to annuitize large amounts is statistically significant, and even in the eye, it's much larger than participants who chose to annuitize small amounts. So regression analysis controlling for other variables is consistent with this result. So the question is, so the result basically I show you here, and I'm being very brief because I only have like 12 more minutes, is we find that small accumulations are more likely to be cashed out. People want to cash them out, and this is really important when we manage insurance corporation. But what's the mechanism? Why is that? Is it that people are different in preferences for annuities, or is it a distribution per se? And do we observe a mental accounting occurrence here? And I think it could also be both. So this is basically what we're trying to answer. So in order to check that, we will also use in our paper propensity score matching. We also use nearest neighbor matching across people who have very similar attitudes and very similar that are very similar to each other. We will also show you, I will also show you that we use occupational information for people, and we look at people with multiple accounts with this insurance company. I will do it very fast, and I will just show you that when we match pairs of people, selected individuals that have the exact gender, retirement age, marital status, and so forth, and where the only difference between them is that the amount that they saved with this insurance company, what we basically find is that the propensity to annuitize from the large account is 3 times bigger than the small account. So this result is consistent with what I showed you before. But how will I overcome the limitation that I have resulting from the fact that I don't observe the entire portfolio? So I will use the features of the Israeli pension system and also the fact that I have information about occupation. And what I'll do is I will exploit the fact that in Israel, all people save the same percentage of their salary to pension, regardless of their profession or their salary. This means that if I have 2 people where I don't know necessarily if they have more savings account, but I know for sure what's their occupation, then the person with an occupation that is likely to be related to high wage is expected to have a higher saving account. And to explain that, I just want to give an example. If I find a medical doctor with a saving of $10,000 upon retirement, this is probably not his main pension account. He probably has other accounts because he has to save. This is how the regulation in Israel works. So basically what we do is that we split the sample into high and low wage occupations. We do it using information about occupation, and I can explain afterwards, not now, that this information is probably accurate in this company. So basically what we show here is that if a person is in a high wage occupation, he is much more likely to annuitize than a person who is in a low wage occupation group. However, if a person is in the high wage occupation, but he only saved a small amount in this company, then the propensity for him to annuitize is lower. And this is basically what we wanted to show. Just for robustness, and I'll do it fast, again, I also have people with more than 1 account in the same company. So we have people with between 1 to 14 different accounts in the same company. And what I show you here is the proportion of people who chose to annuitize where they have more than 1 account. And what we see here basically is their maximal versus minimal account. So even if I have 2 accounts in the same company, I'm more likely to annuitize from the larger account. So we document by now a significant size effect, and we show that the propensity to cash out small accounts is higher to cash out upon retirement. And this tendency is related to having multiple accounts. However, as I said, we only observe the behavior related to 1 product, 1 provider. And I think this is a good example for us who are conducting experiments to justify the need to use experiments also when you have very detailed data. So the experiment here is really helping me to overcome this limitation. And then I can use the experimental method to test the result that I see in the data in another form. So the task that our participants were asked to do is to split a virtual accumulated fund between an annuity that will pay every period until the end of life, theoretically speaking, and a lump sum, where respondents were randomly assigned to 5 conditions and are 5 conditions, and these samples are very well balanced. It's in our paper. I don't have time to show you that right now, but basically almost 2,000 people were assigned to one of 5 groups. In the first group, they were told that they have 1 pension account with 2 million new Israeli shekels. In the second group, they were told that they have a small account with 30,000 and another large account with 1,970,000 and so forth, where in the 5th group, they had 2 equal accounts of 1 million shekels each. One comment, I heard before a question, why do we use people aged 18 to 79 when we are speaking about pension related questions. And the answer for that is that in our third step, we will use a lab experiment with students. So we want our results to be comparable, and in our paper, we analyze the data once with all the data, and then only with people who are closer to retirement, meaning they are 58 and plus, their age is 50 years and above, and we have very similar results, so we control for that. Basically, what you see here is the tendency to withdraw a lump sum, meaning to cash out the sums as one amount upon retirement out of each of our manipulations from the small account. So the first bar that you see on the left is the 30,000 small account, and then 100,000 and so forth. And what basically we see is that the smaller the small account, the higher the propensity to cash out the lump sum upon retirement. When I add to that, it's basically the same figure, but the gray bars are the large account. So we see that the propensity to cash out the larger account out of the two is about, on average, 30 to 40%, where we see differences in the smaller accounts. But when we look at the entire withdrawal as lump sum from the small and large accounts together, please look at this, the left figure. What we see is that on the median of the distribution, and we also show the distribution, the entire distribution and so on in our paper, when I have a small account, the tendency to withdraw lump sums from the entire savings that I have for retirement is smaller than in any other treatment, and this result remains when I only look on the 50 plus age individuals. So this result I think is interesting, because basically what we show here is that if I have a small account that I can cash out upon retirement, this affects my decision on the entire portfolio that I have. So in terms of using mental accounting towards recommendation and financial decisions, maybe the very fact that I already allowed myself to withdraw one of my accounts means that maybe I'm able to psychologically feel better about putting the rest of my funding in a longevity insurance product that people are reluctant to do. Further, we conducted the same experiment with financial experts. Here, we only had two groups because of lack of participants. Obviously, we had one group with one account. This one is the group that in this figure is called one. They only had one account, and a group with two accounts. They received a questionnaire, and they basically were asked to split the money across this account. And being very cautious with interpreting these results, because we don't, the sample is very small. But as we can see, the financial experts were not as affected by the manipulation, and even one of them, some of them had a possibility to write comments on the survey. So one of them told us, like, what's the difference? It's actually the same, which we didn't see when we approached the general population. So by now, what I told you is that the distribution of saving across accounts may have an effect on total annuitization rates. And this could be important because having a very small account to cash out may in turn affect the decision to annuitize the other large account. And it seems like mental accounting may play a role in retirement payout choices. But up until now, we didn't use any monetary rewards in our design. And also, we didn't control for the information condition. Especially, we don't know what people think about their life expectancy, and we don't know what people expect in terms of consumption. So we also conducted a laboratory experiment following a previous paper by me, Orly Sadeh, and Eyal Winter, in which we told people that they have an imaginary currency ZUS, and they have saved 2 million of it, and need to choose whether to annuitize or to cash out the amount out of this fund. They were randomly assigned to groups with different distribution as before, but here we had incentives. So participants were informed that their life expectancy is drawn in the game from a set ranging 0 to 400 months, which is about a little less than 20 years, with an average of 200 months, which means that this is a fair lottery, and that the outcome of the draw would only be revealed after they chose their annuity, as in life. They don't know how long they're going to live before they make the decision. We also told them that the consumption will be distributed between 3 values, which means that they have a consumption of either 3,000, 4,000, or 5,000 zoos per month. We also told them, oh, sorry, I don't know what happened here. There's a figure missing, but never mind. We told them that we will pay them the difference between the annuity that they have chosen and the consumption that was chosen in the game, not by the participant, by the computer. For the time remaining of their life. So basically, we told them that if they are able to save for each period in the game, we will sum all these savings together. Just 2 more minutes. We will sum these up. We will convert them to actual money and pay them. And we paid substantial amounts of almost $40 or $50 to participants. So we really wanted them to think and about the decision as if they are making a real financial decision. And what I show you here is just one figure because I don't have that much time. And this is the decision that participant made out of the either the entire sum, because in the treatment with the 1 account, or the larger account of the 2 in the treatment with the 2 accounts. And basically what we see is that when we have 2 accounts, people are less likely to withdraw the larger account, much like we have seen in our survey before. So to conclude, and I'll be happy to answer a question. I know it was super fast. This paper have a lot of analysis in it. We document a significant and positive effect of the size of the accumulated funds of individual savings on the decision to annuitize their funding upon retirement. We also provide evidence that the very existence of small accounts may change the decisions within the entire portfolio. And this finding suggests that maybe mental accounting play a role in annuitization decision by causing people to perceive the small and large accounts differently and make decisions differently when they have more than 1 account. These results have important policy implications to the decisions about decisions related to household finance and also to management of financial institutions. Thank you. Questions? That was so fast. No question. Okay, I'd love to have questions over email. I know this is really not your area. I'm not sure why I'm here, but I was happy to present it to you guys. Thank you for your presentations, and hope to one day see you in person and not like that.
Thank you for sharing, Abigail.
Thank you. Bye.